About understanding habit change. So, habits are automatic actions done without thinking. They're usually built upon years of repetition. You probably heard things like never skip a meal, always eat breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day. Eat lots of healthy snacks in between. So you eat and you eat and you eat and you are not seeing the weight come off. This becomes an ingrained habit. You eat when you're hungry, you eat when it's time to eat, you eat when other people are eating. Any type of cue or trigger that comes into you says it's time to eat. So it's hard to break a habit like that that's been ingrained in us and in the way that we center our lives around eating. So you eat when it's time to eat, and when you get hungry, and even when you're not. All habits feel impossible to break. So we're going to talk about understanding the habit change. With the right strategies, you can modify them in as little as 2 to 3 weeks. This is good to know because it gives you light at the end of the tunnel. If you can stick with a habit for a couple of weeks, then you'll be done. It'll turn into one of those habits that you don't even have to think about. It's just like when you go from a dark room into the bright sun. You're blinded at first, but eventually you start to get used to it. That's how habits are. You're accustomed to eating 3 times per day plus 3 snacks, and eating less than that will often feel very strange. But remember, it only takes a few weeks to get used to the new routine. So, being in week 7 of IDM, it should feel a little less strange and a little more normal going into these fasts that we're doing and eating less often. And hopefully, you're finding that you are more satisfied and finding a freedom from food. Habits are conditioned responses made up of two main parts. You have a stimulus and a response. The stimulus is that particular situation that triggers the eating response, which is the habit. So you either remove the stimulus or replace one habit with another habit. And typically, replacing a habit with another habit is easier to do than to try to get rid of the habit altogether. So, if the stimulus is the lunchtime break, then on your fasting days, you're going to replace the habit of eating lunch with something else that you can do away from the kitchen or away from the meal area. Most people, I feel like, are doing lunch dinner. So you may even consider this the stimulus is breakfast. Everyone is eating breakfast, and you are needing to replace that habit of wanting to eat breakfast. So even on the weekends, I feel like the weekends might be harder because there's just a little more time to relax, and your family may be in the house and they're eating breakfast. And a lot of times on the weekends, we eat different breakfast foods than our normal eat and go items during the week. The weekdays, it's faster. Everything is going 100 miles a minute, and it's almost easier to skip breakfast during the weekdays. But on the weekend, when things slow down and maybe family members are eating, how can you replace the habit of eating breakfast so that you can continue to build on your new habit and make it stronger and stronger? You could go out for a walk, you could go run errands, you could do some like exercise or yoga. You could, my husband has an office in the house. He'll go in his office and just start working while the girls are eating breakfast. I prefer to grab a cup of coffee and sit down with the girls while they're eating breakfast. So I'm not necessarily taking myself away from the kitchen at that point. And it's probably a lot easier for me now because it's been over 2 years of fasting for breakfast. So having a cup of coffee has become my replacement habit for breakfast. And honestly, it makes things a lot easier not having to eat breakfast. So hopefully you're finding that too. You're finding that you have more time to do other things, maybe to get your lunch ready for the day or dinner ready for that night. You're finding time to do other things or maybe getting some exercise in. But we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but it's a habit that we've created and we're sticking to. So, understanding the change of our habits. Once you break the stimulus response pairing for a few weeks, the habit starts to weaken down. So, the stimulus is waking up, the response is breakfast. After a few weeks of skipping breakfast, you'll find that your hunger begins to weaken, the habit begins to fade. And that will happen with lunch and dinner too if you go further into a fast and you practice dropping those meals as well. Like if you're going to do a 24-hour fast, it'll get easier each time that you try it. I want you to pay attention to the hunger scale. Are you are you in the starving, ravenous, growling mode? Are you in the hungry mode? Are you in the neutral or satisfied level? Are you in the full or stuffed or the bloated or nauseous scale? So, using the hunger scale to pay attention not only to how full you are when you finish a meal, because that is very important, but how hungry you're getting prior to your meal so that you can tell whether or not you ate enough in that previous meal that you had. So you want to stay somewhere between this yellow of hungry, right, leading right up prior to a meal, and then neutral, satisfied, full. So really in those four right there during and after a meal. So we don't want to be stuffed and bloated and to that point where you're just like, I should not have eaten that much or I should not have eaten that. Paying attention to those things because you are going to eat things that maybe are not on the plan and you're going to feel the stuffed and the bloated feeling. But I want you to pay attention to that because it's a learning opportunity to tap into how you're feeling after you eat something like that versus eating something that's more satisfying and nourishing to your body and works for the program. And noticing the difference in those two can help you the next time you come up against, am I going to eat this or that? And then how much of it am I going to eat? Am I going to eat enough to stay full until the next meal? Am I satisfied enough with this meal? Do I need a little bit more? So if you get, we've talked about this, if you get to the end of a meal and you're not quite satisfied, you can always add in like half an avocado with some olive oil, salt, and pepper. You could add in a handful of nuts. So you could do like yogurt and berries at the end of a meal if you're craving something sweet. So you can do something like that to make sure you're getting full enough to make it to the next meal and that before your next meal, you're not in this starving, ravenous, growling mode, but you're more along the lines of just hungry. And if you are getting into the growling, ravenous, starving mode during a fast, you can always use the training wheels to help you get back up to the yellow, hungry mode. So using the stock or using tea or using coffee, using water, make sure you're tapping into those training wheels when you need them. All right, and we want to reinforce the steps we take rather than focusing on the desired end result as the success. So acknowledge and give credit for small steps that move you forward and closer to your goals. Every single day um, is a way to move forward and take steps forward. You're not going to reach your goal on a daily basis, but everything that you do on a daily basis will help you move forward. So celebrating on a daily basis is really important. When you experience hunger pains during a fast, it's a positive sign your body will now work on burning body fat, and the effort of breaking the habit of feeding your body needs to be acknowledged to reinforce this as a positive behavior that you are learning to incorporate and one that's moving you towards your goal. So, affirmation words like, I'm helping my body heal, I'm helping my body burn the fat that it needs to so that I can feel better and so that my health improves. And you can track those things. You can write them down or you can just mentally note this is a good thing. This is a good thing to feel that hunger. But also notice if it gets too far beyond hunger to tap into the training wheels. But eventually, and the more that you practice the fasting, easier it's going to get, the less hungry you're going to get, and eventually we're going to drop the training wheels altogether too. but it's good to use these as we're continuing to practice and hone in on our skills. All right, behavior change. Highlight the positive movement forward and let yourself feel good about your effort rather than becoming discouraged when you do not see the desired results yet. So, as we all probably know, results come further down the road, and the results are an accumulation of what we're doing every day, these habits that we're creating. There are some common causes for plateaus. You're probably not quite to a plateau yet, but I want you to keep these things in mind so that you can avoid falling into these type of traps. And maybe you're already kind of falling into them, and maybe you can work yourself out before it becomes too much of a habit. The fatty beverages are the first one. Drinking a fatty coffee or tea is no different than eating a meal. So even if you're in fat burning mode, your body will start fueling off the fat from the coffee or tea rather than your own body fat, which is counterproductive to weight loss. So yes, you're using fat. You can use fats in your tea and your coffee, but ideally, the way to make this not counterproductive is to go ahead and consume the coffee or tea within a reasonable amount of time. So instead of putting it in a Yeti or whatever type of cup that keeps your coffee or tea warm all day long and sipping on that all day long and having your body tap into that fat source all day long that's in the coffee, try sitting down, having your coffee or tea within like I don't know, 15, 20, 30-minute window. The smaller, the better, right? So instead of dragging out our coffee all morning long, we're just having it, if we're adding fat into it, we're having it within a smaller window so that that fat that our body is going to use, it'll use it and then get back to fasting. If you're not using fat or sweetener or anything in your coffee, if it's just black coffee and plain tea, it's totally fine to drag it out. You can do that. I drink tea all day long, but there's nothing in it. And I'll drink decaf tea all day long. So it's not like I'm caffeinating and I'm not adding in the fat or the sugar. It's just tea. So it's like drinking water, but flavored. So you can do that too. Remember that natural and artificial sweeteners, we want to get those out. Those can most definitely hold us back. They will induce cravings. They'll make fasting harder. Patients will often struggle with fasting, losing weight, lowering blood sugar levels, and then they get frustrated enough to cut out the sweeteners, and then they start seeing the results. So if you're still using sweeteners, this is your motivator right now to continue to cut them down until they're at a zero. Nuts and nut butters, great low carb, high protein, healthy fat option. They can be problematic as they add up quickly. Some nuts are higher in carbs than others. So higher carb nuts include your cashews, your pistachios, whereas pecans, Brazil nuts, macadamia nuts are lower in carbs. And then don't forget about the protein that's in nuts. Excess protein can drive insulin, which makes weight loss more difficult too. So really the theme with nuts and nut butter is really just mind the portions. Pay attention to how much you're taking in. Still don't overdo the nuts and the nut butters. You can have them, but same with dairy. Cheese, nuts, those are things that are easier to overeat on because they're familiar to us. But make sure we're using those as a garnish and just paying attention to the portion of them. Dairy foods are familiar, like I said, so they're easy to go overboard when we're cutting out carbs. Try to stick with less than 4 ounces a day of dairy. Remember when you're getting hungry that you might actually be thirsty. Many times, if you just grab a water, a tea, coffee, broth, wait half an hour, most of the time that hunger is going to go away. Or if you're in that ravishing state, maybe it just like comes back up and brings you back to normal. So grabbing something for thirst before you go for food can help during your fast. Snacking and grazing, remember stick to the meals, the eating windows, let's not graze. Grazing, one thing that that this program talks about is plating. And the idea of not eating while you're getting the food ready, not eating until you have put it on a plate and actually sat down at the table. So only eating when your food is on a plate and you have prepared the meal and you're ready to sit down with it. So that can help avoid the grazing. Constantly eating a little food all day long or constantly eating a little food while you're cooking, it all can all start to add up and it's starting to bump your insulin level up when you're doing that. Let's try to keep it condensed into the meal. So when you're eating, eat a meal. If you're not eating, don't. If you're not eating, don't eat. Don't mix the two up between sitting down at a table with your plate versus picking food here and there. Eat 1 or 2 or 3 meals a day sitting at a table. Don't snack constantly all day long. Again, with the snacks, if you have to have a snack, there's just something that you're not ready to give up, or it's just something that you love that you've never really thought about, but it could go with a meal. Try adding it to the meal instead of making it a separate snack or give away or hide your snacks. If you tend to get hungry before the next meal, keep in mind adding something like an avocado. You could add hard-boiled eggs to the end of a meal or to the meal in general, just to make things extra filling. Eating too close to bed is another plateau trap. So avoid eating late in the day. Ideally, your last meal of the day should be about 3 hours before you go to bed. Meals eaten late at night tend to cause more weight gain. Fat bombs, these are things you can find on Google. It's not something we talk about in this class, but it is something that I would say it's popular in the keto world. So if you're seeing fat bombs as an option, they're easy to make, easy to eat. As a result, people end up snacking on them and eating too much of them, and that can be counterproductive to weight loss as well. So again, we'd rather you eat a full, like a meal, an actual meal, instead of going for something like snacky. And also, it's going like something small like that is not going to cue your brain that you've really eaten a meal. Your brain is going to tell you, oh, that was a snack. Uh, so you have to do something like that, or you enjoy fat bombs, things like that, that give you that sweet tooth craving. Just add it to the end of a meal instead of grabbing them here and there. Other tips for plateaus, avoiding them. Of course, avoid the refined carbs, the starches for comfort, for celebration. This helps avoid emotional eating patterns by breaking the link between food and emotions. Try not to cheer yourself up with cookies or ice cream or donuts or whatever it is. Those are things of the past that we want to start breaking the chain of the habit on, and instead try to replace it with something else, like grabbing coffee with a friend, going for a walk with a friend, scheduling yourself a massage or a pedicure or a yoga session, something that will make you happy. Stress should normally suppress hunger. If a lion is chasing us, we don't usually get very hungry, but many of us are conditioned to treat stress with food, particularly something sweet or something salty. And this activates the reward center in our brain and it gives us comfort. But since cortisol is our primary stress hormone and when it's elevated, insulin is elevated, this starts to get particularly dangerous for weight gain. So when you're stressed, try to do something like you can do bacon and eggs. You can do a nice fatty steak covered in herbs and garlic butter, have some scrambled eggs. You may even want to fat fast during periods of extreme stress. All right, our action points for this week are to envision the journey. Start envisioning the goals you have about your health and your weight. It's a journey that takes time. Avoid making your goals too time specific, but instead start using words that reinforce that you're on a journey on which you will continue to take care of yourself. You'll continue to build the new skills and habits, and the mindset you're creating are all going to be worth it in reaching your overall health goals. Celebrate the small steps along the way. Begin reinforcing the behaviors that move you towards success by celebrating them. You can congratulate yourself. You can do a little physical affirmation, or you could put a star on a calendar. You can do visuals like that that are really important uh, in telling your brain that you are making progress. You're making positive steps. You're highlighting the positive, and that's going to help you move forward and make you feel good about your efforts rather than becoming discouraged if you're not seeing exactly what you want to see on the scale yet. And then look out for the plateau trap. So if I mentioned anything today that you're doing, before we get too far along, go ahead and start trying to hone those in. And the first step is recognizing them. And the second step is just being mindful in your response. Focus on replacing those habits with healthier habits so that it's something you don't even have to think about. It's just what you do and it works towards your goal. All right. And that's it. Make sure you send us your tracker if you haven't yet. Any questions or comments before we go? Almonds are a low carb nut. You can do those as well. So you could do almonds, almond butter. That's great too. I wish they would have listed all the nuts on there. There is a like an online chart you can see. I think it's see if I can pull it up. You can do like the glycemic load of foods list and look at, let's see if we can find the nuts on here. So you can see glycemic index and you can see glycemic load. They're two different things. If you want to read about them, you can come up to the top and see what is the GI, what's the GL, and what does that mean. I particularly like the GL, but you can see low GI is 0 to 55. So if we're looking at things on this list, let's see what like chestnut is up there. Cashew nuts at 25. Let's find the almonds. Almonds at 15 compared to a 25. A 1.9 compared to a 3.1. So you can tell the difference in these. Walnuts are 15. Um, let's see. Pistachios are 15. So those peanuts. So they all seem kind of close. Chestnuts is up there. But if you want to compare coconuts up there, if you want to compare things like your fruits too, is a good thing to look at. Like glycemic index and load of your fruits. You'll see like pineapple's way up there. Banana's pretty high too. So if you want to really get into it, blueberries are on the lower side of the 25. You can look through these GL and GI lists. I'll put it in the chat box for us. And you can also read, like what the difference is in them. All right. Thanks for joining, and I hope you'll have a great day. I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.